In today's video, we have a variety of NHL trade rumors to discuss, including a couple that have links to the Montreal Canadiens. It could see Jeff Petry maybe heading to the Detroit Red Wings. Could the Montreal Canadiens and the Washington Capitals hook up on a fairly significant trade, sending a goalie to the Habs organization? Plus, we also have some updates regarding some trade rumors on the Pittsburgh Penguins, Philadelphia Flyers, Vancouver Canucks, and possible Marc-Andre Fleury heading to the Avalanche. Plus, we also have some updates on the Coyotes arena situation and the International Ice Hockey Federation meeting tomorrow to discuss the whole Russian situation. All that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a lot to cover here. Let's kick things off with the news that there's going to be a big meeting tomorrow for the International Ice Hockey Federation and their council meeting about how to handle the whole situation involving Russia and the Ukraine. Clearly, there's a lot of big decisions to be made, and there's a lot of pressure being placed on them for the Russian teams to either be banned from participating or events to be moved out of there in the future, etc. There's a lot going on. We're not sure how much of a detailed decision we'll get tomorrow. I know there's the World Championships that are coming up, obviously in the spring here, which are usually in May. That's being held in Finland. I know there's some ice hockey federations that are urging them to not allow the Russian team to participate. Then, of course, we have the 2023. There's two events scheduled for Russia as well, including a World Championship the next year go around, as well as a World Junior Championship. So there's a lot of pressure even from the Swiss. The Swiss are, of course, historically very neutral, as many of us who know. It's been a long-running thing about Switzerland being a neutral country, but they're pretty outspoken here in the fact that they feel the Russian team should be not allowed to participate. We've seen a lot in other sports as well. And of course, as I mentioned the other day, talking about the Ukraine situation, it's not something we really want to get too political here on this channel, but certainly, our thoughts are with the people of Ukraine. We hope this can all come to a peaceful resolution in the very near future and all come to an end. It's hard to say when that's going to happen and how this is all going to play out. I know the sports is the least of a lot of their concerns with the main citizens over there, but certainly there is a big impact on sports as well. And, the IIHF is going to have some extremely tough decisions here to make. And it was reported on 32 Thoughts segment on Hockey Night in Canada last night that they're even saying that Russian players who are going to need a visa either in Canada or the US to play next year are even getting a little bit nervous, wondering how the Canadian and American governments are going to handle that. And of course, a lot of that will probably be determined by, how long this drags on or what all comes from this, which is, we don't know the end result and resolution to everything here. As long as it's going on, there's going to be more question marks, more sanctions, etc. So we'll see what happens, but it's going to be very interesting between events being held there in the near future, as well as, a lot of places and countries and federations calling for Russia to not be allowed to participate in the upcoming events. We'll have to get some tough decisions made and hopefully have some big news on that here, possibly as early as tomorrow, because I'm not sure how quickly we'll get decisions, but there is a big meeting going on tomorrow to discuss just that, and we'll see where things go. But I'm sure this is not going to be the last we hear of this story here moving forward. Now, as we mentioned, there's also another big story brewing in Arizona. Of course, we know what their intentions and plans are to move to Arizona State University in a new arena for next NHL season. Of course, their time is coming to an end here in Glendale. They don't have a new arena. Of course, we know that. They're working on getting an approval to build a new arena in Tempe, Arizona, which is not too far from where they're going to hopefully play here in the fall for Arizona State. That agreement is now in place for them to do that. There was a meeting here last week, of course, between the Coyotes and their higher-level executives, along with meeting with their players, and they did have an NHLPA representative, Matthew Schneider, in attendance as well, because the PA certainly has a lot of questions and concerns. A lot of players had tons of questions about how this is all going to work, and a lot of questions about the future of the team, and it sounds like Javier Gutierrez, who was the main leader of the meeting, did his best to answer questions, but certainly does not have all the answers here as of yet. There's still a lot of things to figure out. One of the big concerns raised by the PA was that, by the time they get an arena built and actually are, assuming everything goes to fruition here and comes to be, like 90% of the roster is not even going to be with the team anymore. So it kind of, doesn't really give them a lot of incentive to really want to stick around when there's so many questions. The NHLPA kind of indicated they feel like they've been kind of left here in the dark. Team reputation could play a big role in getting players to want to be able to play in Arizona, of course, in a very unique arena situation, not really knowing a lot of the future. I mean, we are going into this and we don't really know when or if there's going to be a decision made on the new arena bid. I mean, that could take some time here as of yet. But many believe if for some reason if that arena bid does not go through, it doesn't really make sense anymore for the Coyotes to play at Arizona State University, and the likely outcome that some have predicted that could go, and that's only if the arena bid doesn't happen, would maybe be the team be sold back to the NHL, and then the NHL would basically have like an auction or a bid to sell it to a new ownership and have them relocated at that point. But we know that's not going to be something that Gary Bettman accepts very easily. He's fought real hard to keep them there as well. So we'll see where things go. But certainly, interesting to see that there have been some meetings. The players have tons of questions. The NHLPA has concerns. And as Elliotte Friedman mentioned, he doesn't think the NHLPA would really have enough weight or ability to block the move. But it doesn't mean that they can't talk to their players who they represent and try their best to give them all the information and maybe in some cases discourage them from signing there. Like, it's really hard to say how that could play out, but certainly a lot of questions still remain on the Arizona arena situation, and we'll see how they can answer all those questions and concerns of the players moving forward. They may have a hard time getting any kind of name talent to play there during their 2 or 3 year, 4 year span or whatever it is they end up playing at ASU. Now, on to the NHL trade rumors here for today. Let's start here with a couple of the smaller deals that we might see. For example, the Philadelphia Flyers appear to be shopping Derek Brassard. Of course, Derek Brassard has kind of become the journeyman here in the last 2, 3, 4 years after having long stints between Columbus, the Rangers, and Ottawa. Really, ever since then, he's bounced around to several NHL teams, and it looks like he's going to be on the move again. Of course, he's been a veteran guy that's been playing on a lot of one-year short-term deals as well. So he's a veteran guy with a lot of experience, and he's not expensive contract-wise, so it makes sense why, every year near the playoffs, teams become interested in acquiring this player. Really no teams linked to Brassard here as of yet, but we know the Flyers are definitely going to be a seller at the deadline. There could be some more significant moves than others, but he's certainly a player to look out for on the move. The Pittsburgh Penguins, we know that they're likely going to try to add, most likely into the secondary scoring role for like a middle six wingers, ideally what they're looking for. We had mentioned before the possibility of reconnecting with former Penguin and former Cup champion who won with them, Phil Kessel out of Arizona. The price tag doesn't appear to be overly high. We're probably looking at like a mid-round pick. The Coyotes have had it made known for a while that Kessel's been available, and it's not a huge asking price. They'll probably even be able to retain some salary potentially, and that's having a hard time getting a deal done. So it shows there's not really a ton of interest in the former Penguin, former Stanley Cup champion. So we'll see what happens. But another player to watch out for is Anaheim Duck forward Rickard Rakell, who would certainly come a little bit cheaper than Phil Kessel. And of course, the main issue holding the Kessel trade back is the contract, no doubt. Even with salary retained, it's probably more than a lot of teams would still like to be able to take on cap-wise. But in the case of Rakell, it comes at a much cheaper price. Also a pending unrestricted free agent. If Anaheim picked up any of that salary, could reduce it a little bit further. It makes a ton of sense why he would be a player of interest to the Penguins, along with a handful of other teams that are kind of in the mix here and kind of consider themselves to be in that contender category. And it's also been made known here by Frank Saravalli and Dave Pagnotta that one of the players that they would likely be willing to part with in any kind of deadline deal would be one of their top D prospects in Pierre-Olivier Joseph. Of course, he's been kind of up and down between the Penguins and the Miners over the past couple of years. Still has not secured a full-time spot. Fair to say, though, that he's probably at a point where he's ready for a full-time spot and just not sure that they really want to make the room just yet to put him into their full-time lineup. Of course, in the case of injury, he could be useful in the playoffs as well, so they may not make that move, but it is a prospect that's probably going to intrigue a lot of teams talking to Pittsburgh about trades ahead of the deadline. They're not exactly, super deep in prospects, and they might be willing to move this player if it gets them the right deadline deal. I know, actually added depth is what they're looking for, and Rickard Rakell does make a lot of sense. But like I said, he's not the only player that they're looking at. There could be a variety of guys that kind of fit that similar type of mold that he does, along with potential Kessel as well. So we'll see what the Penguins do, but they're certainly in buying mode. The Vancouver Canucks, we know, are shopping to try to gain some cap space ahead of the deadline. We've talked a lot about Miller and Besser getting most of the attention, to some degree Connor Garland as well, but I did see reports here from Dave Pagnotta indicating that they're also very much looking at a potential Tyler Myers trade. I think it's fair to say Myers has been better this year, but he still has a couple more years left at $6 million. Going to be a tougher contract to move, I think, compared to the other guys. I think the other players that's been mentioned in the rumor mill have got a lot more interest. I think they'd have to be a little bit more creative in that sense, but it is another player to look out for. And really, if Tyler Myers could, when he's at the top of his game, I mean, the guy's 6'8", he's a right shot defenseman, he can contribute a bit offensively. Like, there's a lot to like about Tyler Myers. Obviously there's been times his defensive game hasn't been the greatest. I think that's certainly fair to say. He's not exactly, the most efficient defensively, but at the same time, the biggest issue with him is his cap hit. That comes down to a lot of players, just like Phil Kessel. It's not that teams don't want Phil Kessel. They just can't handle the big cap hit that comes with them. Even if you retain salary, when somebody's making $6 or $7 million, even if you retain 50%, there's still, you're looking at $3.5 million or so, whereas you get a player who's making $3.5, $4 million, and you get the team to retain 50%, you can knock that down to like $2 2.25. It's a lot easier to handle, and that's what, at the end of the day, what a lot of things boil down to. So I'm not so sure that Vancouver would want to retain on Tyler Myers, but he certainly is another player that's out there and could certainly meet the needs of a team going into the playoffs. And I think we'll see Jim Rutherford likely do at least one trade to kind of create some cap flexibility. And it may not be as significant as everybody thinks. It could even end up being a guy like a Tanner Pearson, for example, as I mentioned yesterday, in a potential return to LA. But Myers is another guy that's certainly out there too. The Avalanche, and it's been known here that they're likely going to be a team that makes potential multiple moves ahead of the deadline. It just really boils down to what they can finagle here with the cap. A lot of these teams that are tight, it's going to be tough and difficult, and have to be creative to make it happen. But we've been talking a lot about the potential goalie upgrade going into the playoffs. Now, back a while, maybe a month ago, it was all around, maybe is Darcy Kuemper the guy, or is Darcy Kuemper a guy they would trade? And at the end of the day, it seems like right now that he's playing well enough that that's not something they're considering, but it still doesn't mean they wouldn't consider a goaltender move. Now, of course, there's new reports here indicating that a goalie that they're possibly shopping is Pavel Francouz. And this comes from Dan Rosen, NHL.com, talking about a variety of things that can happen at the deadline, things he sees as being potential. He lists a bunch of goalies that he feels are available going to the deadline, and Francouz is on this list. Now, of course, we also make mention of the Avalanche having interest in Marc-Andre Fleury, which is not the first time we've heard this. This has come from a variety of sources over the last several months. So certainly Fleury, I think, will probably be the top goaltender move. I think that's fair to say. I mean, the reigning Vezina Trophy winner has had some pretty solid years here ever since leaving Pittsburgh, especially. He really regained his game in Vegas and has had some good playoff runs, great regular seasons, and there's going to be a lot of interest for sure. Now, of course, he's going to have a lot of control over that as well. Now, we've also talked about the Avalanche maybe going after a guy like Claude Giroux, and it's going to be tough for them to make multiple moves like this. But if Chicago would retain 50% of Fleury's salary, that knocks it down to 3.5. So if they move out a couple of players in that kind of a deal, then maybe offset the money, they still might have a shot at maybe adding another player. So, if they take out Francouz, he's not making a ton of money, but he's at $2 million. If you throw in another player off the roster, which has been rumored that maybe they might consider a guy like JT Compher, I don't think they want to move a guy like Alex Newhook. I don't really think they want to move anybody off their blue line, like a Byram or Jerard or anybody like that. So certainly that would kind of even out the money. I mean, that would make it so that they're not really, put themselves behind, and they could still maybe look to maybe make a different addition as well. Drew would be tough as well. He comes with a big cap hit. I think that would likely require them having a third-party team come in as a broker to kind of eat some cap space for them. So if you get Drew going to like the Coyotes, for example, or Detroit, or another team has lots of space, and they retain 50%, and then they obviously trade them, and so you get Philly to retain, then the other team to retain, and then you get them for a fraction of the price. That's the only way it's likely going to happen. But they could do it. It is mathematically possible if the right pieces off their roster are traded out. So don't be surprised if you see the Avalanche consider trading Francouz if they can mix Fleury into the mix. If they go into the playoffs with Fleury and Kuemper as your goalie tandem, that's pretty good spot to be, and you have to think that might be the strongest goalie tandem in the playoffs. So we'll see what they do, but that's an interesting scenario to keep an eye on. A couple of things concerning the Montreal Canadiens, of course. I see new reports from Montreal Hockey Now indicating that they feel that the Detroit Red Wings are also interested in Habs defenseman Jeff Petry, who we know would like a trade, and has certainly played a lot better lately to kind of increase his value and show his worth. He was having a rotten season, but ever since Marty St. Louis took over after the first couple of games, things have really turned around. The team as a whole is playing much better, including Petry, who's starting to rack up some points and kind of be closer to that defenseman that we saw a couple of years back, who was a big part of the Habs run to the Stanley Cup final. The regular season for Petry was phenomenal that year, and he continues. The points kind of, didn't carry over as much in the playoffs and stuff, but it's still his strong play did, and he was a huge part of that blue line all year long. Now, of course, he still has a few years left of term, and the big reason why it makes a lot of sense for Detroit, and of course, he's also a Michigan guy, so it would be interesting for him. It's probably a place he would be interested in playing. We talked yesterday about the Flyers showing interest and how it makes sense for them, how they might not be re-signing Ristolainen. They can kind of take that money and invest it in Petry, but I'm not sure that's the absolute best thing for them. It does make some sense, but maybe not perfect sense, so to speak. But Detroit, if you look at it, they have a ton of space next year. They don't have a lot of signed players in their blue line. They're going to have Nick Leddy, Danny DeKeyser, Mark Stahl, and Troy Stetcher all coming up on UFA status. They've only have a couple of players back there signed for next year, including Hronik and Seider. So Petry could certainly slide in there and take the place of a DeKeyser and a Leddy. If you look at all the money they're making, I know there has been some talk they might sign like Stahl to another one-year deal. I don't know if they will or not, but even if they do, it's not going to be very expensive. They have the space they could do that. They could let Leddy and DeKeyser go and bring in Petry to kind of be that right shot veteran defenseman. To me, Petry to the Red Wings makes way more sense than it does to Philadelphia. I bet it does have some sense to go there too. So I think there's options here, good options for Montreal. I'm not really sure exactly what the Red Wings would kind of send back Montreal's way in return. But there's lots to like there in Detroit with some younger players. I don't know what they'd be willing to move. They might be forced to send Montreal, maybe one player who's a little bit older return. They might not want to give up too much. And I don't know that his value is super high, but it depends on what kind of goes down between now and the deadline. But I think it's a real viable option here for the Habs and Petry to find a new home for him. And of course, we've heard a lot about Artturi Lehkonen and his availability. He's had some good solid games here lately, kind of putting his value where it is, being linked to Washington. So we have that link of the Capitals wanting a middle six forward, somebody like Lehkonen who can play that, good solid two-way play, kill some penalties, give you a little bit of secondary scoring, and he's a guy who's just kind of a good utility player, goes up and down your lineup, right? So I can understand the interest. Not a big superstar, but he does all the little things well, and there's a lot to like there. Now, we also know that the Habs have been interested in Ilya Samsonov in Washington. Now, that was very interesting when those rumors first surfaced, and the Habs reportedly were in touch with the Capitals, checking on his availability and seeing if they could discuss a potential trade. There's also been more notes here in the past week that these two teams have been scouting each other a lot, so you have to think that there might be more serious conversations going on. Now, there's no clear-cut scenario here that they're definitely going to trade Lehkonen for Samsonov. I'm not saying that's going to be the case. If that were the case where they completed a trade and both those guys were involved, I don't think it would be one for one. There would be other pieces involved. And it wouldn't be a complete shocker if it was Vanecek moved instead of Samsonov. Either way, if you look at the Montreal Canadiens goaltending situation, I don't know what they want to do here moving forward because they have a lot of goalies in the mix now. You'd have to think if they made a trade with Washington for either Vanecek or Samsonov, I would guess that there'd have to be a goalie going the other way to the Capitals. And if the Capitals wanted to get somebody with more experience and kind of, shore up that position, I would think they probably would want Jake Allen. That would be my guess. Samuel Montembeault is still young, relatively, not overly established. You get Andrew Hammond. Yeah, he's been playing well lately, but it's only been a few games back in the NHL. I think Allen would be the guy, right? So maybe they trade Allen in a deal like that and bring back a younger goalie, either in Samsonov or Vanecek for the future. We don't know the status of Carey Price. That's up in the air. You get Caden Primo, who's had more than a good opportunity this year and has proven that he still needs more time in the minors so that you can take the pressure off of Caden Primo next year and let him continue developing. You don't want to rush this kid and really ruin him, so he can stay down there. Hammond, well, depending on what kind of run Hammond has, I don't really know that he comes back next year anyway. You got Montembeault, who's played better. Maybe the goaltending tandem at the NHL next year could end up being either Price and Montembeault or a combination of Price, Montembeault, Vanecek, or Price, Samsonov. We don't even know if Carey Price is going to play again. Like, I've been outspoken to say I'm not entirely convinced that he does. Like, you just don't know. Even if he does play, do Montreal trade him in the offseason? Do they work out a way for him to go somewhere else? There's a lot of question marks with this team. And if you have an opportunity to acquire a solid young goaltender who can definitely be one of your one or two moving forward for the next number of years, I think it's a scenario that Gorton and Hughes have to seriously consider. So we'll see if these talks with the Washington Capitals continue to move and if these teams continue to scout each other. But if you could have a chance to grab Samsonov, I think, especially, Vanecek's pretty good too, but Samsonov to me could be one of the great young goalies of in his age group, right? So you have to take a chance here if you can do it, but teams, they may not really go too much further. Maybe it's a deal where Lehkonen goes to Washington, and maybe they get a decent prospect or something back in return, Hendrix Lapierre, something to that effect. I don't see them trading Connor McMichael or Nick Snively or anybody like that, but we'll see where this goes. But these two teams seem to be having lots of dialogue, lots of scouting going on, and it's just really interesting scenarios that could be being discussed, and we'll see if anything comes to fruition. So let me know your thoughts on what we discussed today down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We will keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.